Yeah. Okay, call the meeting to order. This is the September 6th, 2022 Council of Revenues meeting on the general fund. First item on the agenda is, has there been any communications, Dr. Kobe, to the Council of Revenues?
No.
Any public comment? So if anyone wants to make a public comment, they can what? They can go on the chat or
They can write us in the chat and
okay.
we'll link them in.
Can they also raise their hand?
They can raise their hand as well.
Oh, okay. So I don't see anyone raising their hand. I don't see any. I don't see any chats. Okay, so we haven't received any communications, and there's no public comment. Okay, next item on the agenda is the minutes of the August 2nd, 2022 meeting on total personal income.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any comments? Okay, take a vote. Vice Chair Newell. Aye. Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
We're voting. Dr. Siderhouse.
Hi. Yes.
Dr. Bonham.
Yes.
Councilmember Maynard.
Yes.
Councilmember Hayashi.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee, we're voting to approve the minutes from the TPI meeting on August 2nd, 2022.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a little late. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the minutes are approved unanimously. Okay, next item on the agenda, I think it's Dr. Kobe, right? The
Yep.
recent legislation from the 2022 session. Is there a handout on that too?
Nope. Well, it is in your packet,
Okay,
right? And so then I'm going to just show you my screen as well.
okay, great.
So I just figured I would roll in a quick debrief on where we stand with year-to-date revenues, and then I'll go over the recently passed legislation as well.
Okay, that sounds good.
So this is the preliminary for July 2022. You guys should have all received this about a month ago. The things I would like to point out is, one, we don't have any adjustment on this slide anymore, right? So for the last 2 years, because of the IRS shift in revenues and because of all these weird things, you actually needed to backward your way into do some math to understand where we were going with things, but things have changed now. And I think things are a little bit more straightforward in terms of looking at the budget, looking at revenues and looking at changes over time. So this is what you get a little bit. What you'll see here, and at least for the month of July, and we're going to look at the month of August for in the next slide, is the GET and TAT are pretty strong, and income is like flat. Essentially flat, right? Which is what we kind of expect, right? So we have inflationary pressures, which would usually feed more into TAT and GET than any place else. And we still have a growing tourism sector, right? So this is what we're seeing. It's reflected in our data, and this is where we're going with things.
Dr. Kobe, do we have any idea where we stand as of the end of August?
Yeah, that slide's coming up.
That's
next.
Oh, it's coming up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's a slide for this. This is not the final preliminary. We do not get we need a couple more accounting statements, but what I did was I just brought these numbers out of our system today, which is all the revenues as of yesterday. And this is just for August 2022 compared to August 2021, right? So in most preliminary statements, we have a cumulative number. This is a month over month number, so it's a little different. But you will notice similar trends, right? So the GET is up. Last month it was 13. This month is 12.3, right? If we look at the transit accommodation, it was up 30% last month, month over month. Now it's up about 20%. So we're getting these numbers. The individual income tax came in a little stronger this month. And total collections, which is not exactly general fund, but it's up 13.7%. So if you really if you wanted to do just a mental calculation, taking the average of those two, since we only have 2 months, is a pretty good thing. And that would put you in around, I would give you like between 8 and 10% is where we at for the year. Does anybody have any questions about that? Great. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the legislation that passed this year. We had three things that will affect revenues going forward. Three major pieces of legislation that passed in the 2022 legislative season that will affect ongoing revenues. One is there's Act 80, which is basically a GET exemption for shippers, stovetopping, wharfage fees and things, so it doesn't get passed on. The biggest one is EITC. They made the EITC refundable and permanent, right? So before it was a non-refundable tax credit, and this year is a refundable tax credit. This increased the generosity of that credits considerably because most low-income people did not have an individual income tax liability to take their credit against. So this is why we have a bigger than or a relatively large increase. And the last one is they reinstated the renewable fuels production credit. This is a cap of $20 million. It doesn't mean that those are actual real estimates, but when the practices, when they instate a cap, we use a cap amount to deduct it from revenues. Does anybody have any questions?
What's the third provision do with the third Act 216?
Act 216, there's a bunch of, and I don't remember specifically, but like there's a bunch of new renewable energy activities that are accessible for this credit that are outside the solar and the wind credits that currently exist in the renewable energy income tax credit.
So it says
This is more for like system, like big power plants
Batteries.
and things. Yeah, yeah. More for battery or big power plants and like alternative fuels and things like that.
So it says renewable fuels. Is it what's that encompass? Does it encompass things like ethanol or?
It encompasses things like biofuel.
Okay. Is there actually any facilities going up in Hawaii to produce?
Not that I know, but I don't want to like, that's just what I know of, right? So that's not a guarantee that that will not happen. But right now it is, they weren't utilizing the credit as of last year because it didn't exist, but they reinstated it.
Yeah. The earned income tax credit, that one has a pretty big price tag, 47,
Yes.
48 million, yeah.
And there's two things wrapped up into it. One, it was going to expire, right? And two, it became renewable and it became refundable. So in years where it was non-refundable, previous years, it was about 18 million, 20 million. But because you're creating the refundable and this income class generally has really low income tax liabilities to begin with, this really increases the size of the credit that these people are receiving.
So we're talking a total of about let's say 75 million
Yes.
or so
Mm-hmm.
on a kind of a steady state basis, which
Yeah.
out of what kind of forecast do we have? 9 billion?
Yeah, it's we're talking less 9 billion, 9.5 billion. So like definitely less than
Oh, so under
like less than
1.
1%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like with the when we do tax caps, like that is, or that's a cap on the credit. So these are not necessarily real revenues, right? So the caps, and then the renewable energy, the EITC. So because this is being renewed, about 20 or $18 million was already we weren't collecting that in previous years, right? So if you really wanted to think about the net, it's probably a little over $30 million.
So, Seth, are you saying that the Act 216 is a cap, and
Yes,
so we won't necessarily lose
correct.
$20 million every year? It's
Correct.
got to be used in order to be claimed.
Correct.
Yeah.
And just in my experience, there's a lot of like tax credits that get passed through the legislature that are underutilized.
I know that's true for some of the ag credits.
Mm-hmm. And this is like, my understanding is this one is its anticipation of somebody wanting to build a large power plant that would facilitate our biofuels and really get us towards the renewable energy goals. So it's not a guarantee that this will happen. Anything else?
You have
See-
other things in your presentation?
Well, I'll just
Oh, it's
give
this
you
one.
like the basic things, right? So
Okay.
these are this is in your booklet, but like these
Right.
are the parameters for Model 1. The Model 1 served us pretty well last year, came in within like 0.5% given the things. If you know, I think we're probably somewhere around here in this area for current expectations. Carl, you can jump in on this if I'm wrong, but I think this is like basically what a lot
That's
of
right.
the forecasters are expecting.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
this is, go ahead.
I'm sorry, yeah, the personal income growth, that's nominal, not real, right? So,
Right.
so I would expect it's more in the middle of that set of rows.
Well, the personal income forecast from the council, the average is 4.78%,
Okay.
and the visitor arrivals forecast is 12.2% right now.
So yeah, so that would put us around the 8.5%. And this is what you guys have forecast for this right now. It's 5% and 3.5 going forward. And just I thought it would be interesting to compare. This is what your mean input, which is 8.4, which makes sense in light of that chart, right? And then at 6.1, 4.5, and it diminishes over time. So that's the conclusion of my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you guys have them.
What's wrong with Model 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're really UCLA. It's been getting worse and worse and worse. So if we've been including it to honor you guys, but in the future, we would like to take that out of the booklet just because it hasn't been useful for about 3 or 4 years now.
So
Is there
moved.
is there any problems with that?
I don't have a problem.
Okay,
It might,
yeah.
it might prompt us to think about something to replace it with, though.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
that's
we
a
can
different
look,
discussion.
yeah, we can work on that as well. But like it just hasn't been. It's been in left field for 3 or 4 years now.
Mhm.
Is it, do we pay for it?
We paid for it. We don't pay for it anymore. So
Okay.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
mhm,
Yeah, that goes all the way back to Tuduck, I think. That
mhm.
was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And wasn't it Dr. Nicholsberg or something, Jerry Nicholsberg from UCLA?
I can't remember.
And my guess is it has something to do, like the yen is involved in that in the forecast, and the yen has been moving around a lot lately. So that's my guess, but it's been off. It's either been too high or too low for a long time. So any other questions?
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Cole.
Mhm.
Okay. So I guess we're opening the discussion on next item on the agenda is discussing the
General
current
fund
year's,
forecast.
current year's general fund tax revenue forecast for fiscal year 2023.
I can start off if
Okay. Go ahead. Dr.
the
Bonner.
Model 1. So our last forecast was 5%, and Model 1 was 8.4, I think. My forecast from our general fund model falls right between those two. And I went through and looked. I always go through and look at what the council mean forecast is for the different components. And my thinking was that the council mean forecast, by and large, they look pretty reasonable. I thought the CPI forecast, the council's forecast for the CPI for the fiscal year is 5%. Mine's about a percentage, about 150 basis points higher. The thing that I thought was the most interesting was that the council's forecast for construction completed is only 6.5%, when I think mine is closer to 20. And the data that comes from DOTAX, they provide. I just looked at the file we got today. They provide private permits, but it's the government permits that have been the government contracts that have gone through the roof. And I think it was fourth quarter last year, there was an $8 billion federal contract, I think it was from NAVFAC, that was something that would be spread out over multiple years. And in June, there was $4 billion worth of contracts, government contracts. So in our forecast, we're spreading that out over multiple years, right? No, and there were a few of those contracts that looked too big to be real, but like $2.7 billion for paving on the Big Island. You could almost pave the whole island for that. But anyway, there's a heck of a lot. So we're talking high double-digit growth rates of government contracts at the end of last fiscal year, right? So the work's coming, and is spread out over the next 3 or 4 years. Which leads me to suggest that the council's forecast may be a little bit on the low side. Although I don't think Model 1 is on the low side. I wouldn't be inclined to go that high.
I'd like to mention what I see, with my businesses, and that is still a severe labor shortage all around a lot of businesses here. Not only restaurants, but a lot of businesses, the hotels, or whatever. So that labor shortage has not been alleviated from what I see. And the other thing that I see that would be concerning to me is that the yen now is at 143 yen to $1. And when I was thinking of going to Japan before, it was 108 just a couple of years ago, and now it's 143, and the yen has been so much weaker. Japan has been very slow to let tourists in. They have still the visa requirement, and the and they did away with the tourist agency guide, having a guide, but they still have to book all your flights and hotels through a travel agency. And my concern is when I looked at the flights, because I'm planning to go anyway to Japan in November. When I looked at the flights, and there are much fewer flights available, and those flights were not full. This is, say, in November. And so we are expecting a whole bunch of Japanese tourists to come to Hawaii. And I was concerned that less might be willing to come here because of the fact that their yen would be worth so much less in buying US goods, and including hotels. It's a significant drop in the value of the yen. And I think that is my one concern when looking forward, that we might not see the Japanese tourists come and impact Hawaii's economy.
I think that's a legitimate concern. Certainly the
Sure.
yen is so weak right now. And they are not flying, they're not traveling. And that's the biggest reason why our foreign travel is so low, is because Japan is not traveling. And they've got a spike, as we talked about before, a spike in COVID that is outside. I mean, they've got twice as many cases right now than the US. Of course, who knows as far as reporting, and their population is a little bit more than a third of ours. So I think it's going to be a while before the Japanese come back in droves as they used to. But fortunately, the Californians are spending a lot too. So the US market, the US consumers are spending. Of course, a lot of that is due to inflation and things like that. But the US, what the US is kind of making up for the foreign travelers. So that's a good thing. I certainly share your concern on not only the labor force, but from things I've been reading, instead of seniority, you've got juniority, junior, and a lot less productivity with new people who are being trained, and it's going to take a while before they are as productive as the people who have left. So I think productivity is a very big concern of mine in a service-based economy to begin with, and one where, as you know, the population of the state is going down, and low productivity and low population growth do not usually foretell a strong economy. So that is a concern of mine.
I do see that shift in productivity. I mean, it seems like everything is moving a lot slower. Just everything. And the businesses here are really struggling, trying to, there's been a lot of new businesses opening up, fast food restaurants and whatever. But as far as the ability for most businesses to hire, it's been really bad. Even if you're willing to offer more for the employee, there just aren't employees looking for jobs. They kind of seem to have disappeared. And so the concern is we're heading for something where the labor shortage in Hawaii is really going to affect our economic growth, because we haven't had, look at the medical field, and not only medical field, but in every single business I see, everybody's looking for employees, and we haven't been able to find employees.
Paul?
So we have to remember that everything's moving really quickly. And since the start of the year, the labor force in Hawaii has grown by 4,000 people. The numbers out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics tell us that the labor shortage in Hawaii is no worse than it was in 2018 or 2019. So right now in Hawaii, there's 1.5 job openings for every unemployed person. That's exactly this. Actually, it was higher in 2018 and 2019. But we tend to forget how tight labor markets were back in 2018 and 2019. And of course, in 2019, the unemployment rate bottomed out in the 2.25% range. So the things are changing very, very quickly. I don't expect the labor force is going to continue to grow like that. But I think the combination of some slowing of labor demand as the U.S. economy slows, as the global economy slows, and some continued entrance into the workforce is going to make things much more manageable. And I don't know if people will stop talking about labor shortages. I'm a little puzzled by the discussion about productivity, because one of the things that we've actually seen is big increases in productivity, because we're doing, we're actually our output keeps going up, particularly with the rebound of tourism, but we're doing it with fewer workers. That's the definition of an increase in productivity, not a decline in productivity. So if anything, I think businesses have learned how to do things with fewer workers, which is a recipe long term for changes in the way we do things that actually allow you to produce more with fewer workers.
I think that for the tourism industry, we're talking about just offering less services, like housekeeping. They might not be housekeeping every single day that they used to be, and things that
they are now. The latest labor contracts require that
we have
to offer it.
Okay, so I see a drop in the amount of services given to the tourists. I see everything seems to take a lot longer. I mean, when we deal with people, there's still some working remotely, and it always seems like there's a delay in getting things done, compared to the past. It's just a sense of, everybody was working at a different pace, and now it's like, oh, well, we can't get that done because of that. They're not willing to work as long hours or put in the effort that they did in the past.
So can we talk a little bit about the tourism picture? Because I think, obviously the strength of the dollar is a problem. And what you're dealing with is a situation where U.S. arrivals and spending per person per day are at, I don't know if spending per person per day is at a record, probably not, but arrivals are at a record, and spending per person per day by U.S. visitors has gone up. And if you look at total real visitor spending, we're getting pretty close to the previous peak. I think we're 3 or 4% below the previous peak, even though we're well below the previous peak of visitors. And what many people were hoping was that there would be pent-up demand on the part of Japanese visitors, and they would come rushing back in. And of course, the travel restrictions, and I think the big one, at least in my mind, so scheduled flights to Japan have gone up significantly, a lot. I mean, they're volatile, but they've gone up a lot. Not having to test to get back into the country, right, is a big deal, because people are concerned about disrupting their right, getting stuck here, right? You worry about getting stranded and having to spend an extra 2 weeks in Hawaii, and that's a big problem. In our forecasts, we're only talking about having Japanese visitors. So we've downgraded that a little bit from where we were in 2 months ago or 3 months ago. I think we're at about 40% of 2019 levels by the end of the year. And so what's happened since we released the last forecast is the US arrivals came in stronger, spending came in stronger, Japanese visitors came in more slowly, not a lot more slowly. And we saw pretty strong numbers in latter half of July and August. So we're up to about 30,000, a little bit more than 30,000 passengers per month from Japan. So still a long ways from previous peaks. But we, in April and May, we were at 10,000. The other thing that people don't talk much about is the Canadians have come back very strong. My guess is that by winter, Canadians may very well set records for the number of Canadian visitors. The non-US, non-Japan market is at about 60 to 70% of its pre-pandemic levels. So, we're not talking about a situation where Japan gets back to normal in this fiscal year. At least that's certainly not in our forecast. It matters to the overall economy quite a bit, but it's not like we're hanging our hat only on the Japanese visitor coming back.
What do you think about the Fed's rate hikes, Carl and Jack? How's that going to impact the economy looking out, and the impact?
It's already impacting the economy,
yeah.
Right? It's impacting. In fact, since Powell's speech, right, mortgage rates have completely retraced. I looked at them today. I think we were at 6.1 national today, and the 10-year bond is at 3.3. And so the bond markets in general seem to have finally woken up to the fact that the Fed's not going to start lowering rates in March of next year like they were thinking 3 months ago. And where you're seeing the impact, the most immediate impact right now is in housing nationally. We're seeing there are effects in Hawaii. I mean, if you talk to builders, they're certainly seeing less interest. They're still, so we're talking about building new homes. They're still building fewer homes than there's demand for. Nationally, that's not really the case. Nationally, the sales numbers have fallen dramatically. Inventory has risen dramatically, and there's a big wave of completions coming. And that's where the Fed will have the biggest impact on the economy. It's almost always housing that turns before the economy does. So
I mean,
You
that
know,
was
the-
a
the
Great
qu-
Recession, right? Great Recession in the housing start. As one
Well,
of the
every
lead
recession.
indicators. Yeah.
Almost. I mean, we were talking about the UCLA models before, where Ed
Yeah.
Leamer used to run the forecast at UCLA Anderson School, I think, and he always used to talk about housing being a leading indicator of recessions. I mean, so I don't know anybody who would suggest that the U.S. economy is poised for anything even remotely like the U.S. recession. So I hate to the Great Recession or the Great Financial Crisis. I don't even want to use that word. Most people are, thinking of a modest slowdown. Whether there's a recession or not doesn't really make that much difference if it's a modest one, right? Where you have a small uptick, say a 100 basis points increase in unemployment, something like that. And frankly, no one knows how fast inflation is going to come down. That's the wild card, right? We know that commodity prices have come down a lot. Food prices globally have come down a lot. Gasoline prices in the rest of the world have come down a lot. And all of those are going to start showing up in the headline numbers. So, I think Hawaii's inflation has probably peaked. National inflation has probably peaked. And the headline numbers will come down quite quickly, but the core numbers may very well stay elevated for an extended period of time. And that's really what the Fed cares about. So, whether we get a soft landing or a modest recession, or we escape this altogether because something happens that brings inflation tumbling down, you're still talking about even a modest recession. For the whole year, the U.S. economy would grow, right? So on a calendar year basis, so like the 2001 recession, U.S. economy grew. In fact, it didn't even have two quarters of negative growth. And it was.
But we did, right, recently.
Well, we did
last year.
last year.
Yeah.
Subject to
I
revision.
don't even want to talk about that. I think those are statistical rubbish. But and 5 years from now, we'll look back and those numbers will probably not be negative, or at least we'll have only one negative. But that's not the definition of a recession anyway. It's quite a bit more complicated than that. So yeah, the Fed's going to keep raising rates. So we're going to get a 50 or 75 basis point increase in a couple of weeks. And probably another 50 basis point increase after that. I hope they'll pause after that and wait and see what happens. But I don't know, forecasting what the Fed's going to do is almost as bad as forecasting what the council's going to do.
My concern about the 23 fiscal year forecast is more kind of in the mechanics of the revenues, ups and downs, that sort of thing. 2022 was a 29% growth, and to a level that was just really unexpectedly and abnormally high. And so the question is, if that was a spike, then you would expect some cutback, not just the smaller positive number, but maybe even a negative number, and you would still have an extraordinary level of revenues compared to a historical trend. And so I was looking at the numbers for 2022, the April numbers for revenues, basically the 1.4, what was that, 1.4 billion for that month?
Yeah, we had a huge number. I
Right.
forgot one. Yeah.
And so my question is, in order to be convinced that we're going to have a 8% or 6% or 5% growth in 2023 fiscal year revenues, I need to be convinced that the spring of 2022, which was the latter half of fiscal year 2022, that was not an aberration. That we're dealing with really kind of a permanent shift up in the revenues, as we saw in that picture that Seth put up.
But what I'm hearing from Carl is some of the inflation is coming down, like the commodity prices and other things.
But those tax revenues, I think Seth would tell you that happened across the entire country. Now that doesn't make it permanent, right? That doesn't mean it wasn't an anomaly. So the
Okay.
question is, what was driving it, right? What
Right.
were the major components?
And I suspect a lot of it had to do with transfer payments that ended up in people spending money and that sort of thing.
Most states are
Hey-
not expecting negative growth or anything like that. Most states are expecting moderately positive growth in kind of like in line with what Hawaii is doing for this year.
Well, they may be having the same kind of discussion that we're having.
I mean, some things will probably stay up, though, like the housing, the rental prices. I don't know if they'll fall, but you said, Carl, the commodities have fallen, some other things, food prices have come down.
Yeah, those will take time to work their way through into overall consumer prices, and prices for construction materials and things like that, and gasoline. Right, our gas prices have barely budged, while national prices have fallen about a quarter.
I thought it was about
eventually-
550 like earlier in the year, maybe in April. But
I don't
now
know.
I
I
think
don't buy gasoline.
now it's about $5 a gallon.
Has it come down that much? It's come down 10%. That's
About,
Well,
at Costco, for
Well-
the premium, yeah.
At regular retail, it's 530, 540.
I think the strength of the dollar, which of course is in part due to the aggressive moves that the Fed has made in comparison to some other countries, certainly is helping with inflation in that we are a net importer. And so everything, the value of the dollar means that we are buying things at a discount. And that certainly includes the price of oil, right? So part of the improvement in the price of oil is because the dollar is so strong.
and yet for much of the other things that we buy, it takes a period of time for that strong dollar to work its way through, right? For all the pass through to happen. So we haven't seen the full effects yet of that strong dollar on helping to bring prices down. So that's another reason why we should expect at least headline inflation to come down. On the other side, some of the biggest components of core inflation are housing and shelter and rents, and we actually in the official measure from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think the July numbers for rent of primary residence, or it may have been the shelter component, was only up 3%. And yet we were in 2022, we were seeing rents that were going up in the certainly the low double-digit range. Those growth rates have slowed a little bit. On Oahu, the data we have from Zillow for the first half of the year show inflation, I think, of around 4 or 5% in rents. But we still aren't seeing that in the CPI, which means that this is true nationally as well. So that big piece, like a third of the CPI, is coming from those rents, and they're going to stay elevated and may even grow a little bit, which is going to continue to put pressure on the Fed to raise interest rates, even while the headline number may come down sharply with falling commodity prices and falling food prices.
And if I could just get back to productivity, well, perhaps it's not a state of Hawaii problem. I was really kind of taken aback to see the first and second quarter US productivity numbers, minus 7.4% for first quarter, minus 4.1% for second quarter.
Those are quarters with negative GDP numbers.
Yes, but not that negative, right? So, yeah.
No, and rapidly rising employment numbers, right? Adding large numbers of jobs, but what I would argue are probably flawed. So if you look at there's two different measures of output. There's gross domestic product, gross domestic income. Gross domestic income in the first quarter was positive 1.5%.
Right.
Gross domestic product was minus 1.5%. They're supposed to be the same.
I know.
And when they're not, it's usually the GDP number that gets revised up. So I would suggest, I don't think those numbers are going to hold up, and they really aren't very consistent with the other statistics on how strong the US economy was during that time period.
Still scary.
Well, yeah, we were talking about that earlier, how weird things are. I mean, there's plenty of things to, right, there's lots of different things we can worry about. And I think the risks are to the downside for sure. It's hard, you really don't feel like if we were to pick a number that was say 5%, that, we could be wrong badly to the upside. But incidentally, if you go back, I think it was the very last page in the handout lists our forecast going all the way back to 2011. And it has a line for a forecast, and then it has a line called base, which I assume means actual, right? It doesn't mean first base or something. It means the actual growth rate. And if you look at the average error that we make, it's negative for no matter. I mean, so if you leave out if you leave out the pandemic, which was kind of too weird to make much sense out of in terms of those numbers, the average error in see if I can find it. It was
Talking the second to last page.
less than 1%. It's the title of it is Table 7. And leaving out the pandemic, the average error is negative in the September meeting, the January meeting, the March meeting, the May meeting. If you do a mean absolute percent error, so you don't let negatives and positive offset, right? You take the absolute value of everything and take the average error. Then the average error is around 3% in September and January, and about 2% in March and May. But we tend to under forecast, or we have in the last decade. That doesn't mean we'll do it again.
This
But
would
don't we
surprise,
over forecast when the economy is going down? Isn't that our historical trend?
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be normal.
Yeah.
Economists under forecast during expansions, and
Yeah.
much of that would have been an expansion, right? So
Yeah.
from 2011 to 2019, that's an expanding economy.
Mhm.
So we should have been under forecasting, or that would have been normal.
you would be kind of shocked to hear that I prefer to be under forecasting rather than over forecasting.
I am. I was greatly shocked.
I just prefer to be right, but I haven't figured that one out. I mean, that's our charge, is to be as accurate as we possibly can be.
Yeah.
At least that's my interpretation of it.
So we're on record for 5%.
Sounds like a
And-
good number.
Speaking of under forecasting.
Yes.
But then we should add 3% to that.
Or 1%.
Oh, yeah, the problem is with the April, May revenues being such a high rate. And,
Mhm.
2 quarters that we've had, or July, August, is not representative for the whole year. So my concern is that it may be misleading as far as what the growth rate would be for the rest of the year.
Well, so one thing you got to remember is that those quarters were also very much impacted by what was a recovery, right? So yeah, of course. So no quarter last year was representative of the whole year because things were changing so rapidly.
Right.
But we certainly wouldn't want to extrapolate the growth rate for those quarters into this year, obviously.
Yeah, so that's why I wouldn't use those rates as something that would apply for the whole year.
Well, if we put our faith in the models, then we're talking closer to 8%. But I'm not sure if I want to.
That's more optimistic than I would be.
I think more optimistic, especially since the yen is so weak right now. I don't think that we can use that as a guide. I mean, the yen just went down in the last few months. It's just.
Well, but our models aren't really driven by the yen, are they? I mean, maybe a UCLA model, but our Model 1, for example, all we have is visitors, and obviously the end effects may affect visitor counts. But it's not explicitly in the model. So if we're inputting our assumptions about visitors and we believe those visitor assumptions, then, and we also believe our total personal income forecast of, what was it? Real forecast was -1.5 or something like that. And with you put in a few percentage points for inflation, you're talking about 2.5 positive, perhaps.
And 10% for construction.
Right.
If I could just as an outside observer, like oftentimes you guys, we give you the model and you guys, oh, I don't like the model for this reason or that reason. But if you look at the model versus especially in the September forecast, the model actually is sometimes better than and less
And us.
volatile than
So,
the whole.
so Seth, it would be helpful in that table.
Yeah, we
to
should
not
put that in
just
there.
have-
Yeah.
Yeah, we really should
work on
have-
it. Yeah. You're right. I'll make the note of it.
Because
Thank you.
essentially what the council is doing, one way you could think about what we do, it's not exactly right, but we subjectively adjust the forecast, right? We
Right.
look at the numbers that come out of the model, we look at our assumptions, and then we move the forecast around. And there's no guarantee that our decision making moves us in the right direction. So it'd be interesting to see what the model forecasts are telling us. So just for some background information, the forecast that comes out of the model that I run for the fiscal year is 7%, and that forecast involves starts off high, right? So, but it ends the fiscal year. So the fourth fiscal quarter is -2%. So it's not extrapolating. It's not saying that we're going to repeat April and May of next year. It's actually saying revenues are going to be lower this year than they were last year. So it starts off very strong at in double digits. I think it's 15% in the first fiscal quarter, which we aren't seeing yet in that data, right? We're at did we say we were going to be at like 10 or 11% for the average for July and August? I can't remember what the
No,
average
it was 8 to 10, right? I think Seth said 8 to 10.
Yeah, so if I'm getting 7, if you believe the rest of the path, then it would need to be lower than that. If we're only starting out at 8 to 10, it depends on how much, whether we end up the fourth fiscal quarter flat or slightly up or slightly down.
Well, how about I throw out 6% for the heck of it, see how that sticks.
Is that
I
a
like
motion?
that number.
I'll second
I
that.
think that's
Well, it's not a
reasonable.
vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just getting people's
I mean,
reaction.
Yeah, I think Jack, you had a good point about, the prior year was so high, 29%.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
Carl,
this is-
Carl, you're saying some of the decrease in the prices is still, it's still working its way through the system.
Yeah,
Okay.
our forecast for Honolulu CPI, I think, has it down to year-over-year growth at the end of 2023 of about 2.5 to 3%.
Inflation.
So it's coming. Yeah.
It's the CPI, yeah,
Yeah.
for Hawaii.
So we still have it pretty elevated for this fiscal year.
And 6% was our lowest. I think if you look at the mean forecast of the 7.
What table is that?
Model 1, due tax, summary of members forecast.
Oh, right.
The model 2 UCLA is negative 5.0.
Well, we decided UCLA is.
We're firing UCLA.
Yeah.
And model 3 is 5.8. The mean.
Yeah, I think he was talking about the range.
And it turns
Yeah.
out the 6% in the model 1 is me.
Hey,
Okay.
Jack,
I'm coming out of the closet on this.
Yeah, okay. Now he says what his number is. Because I agree, it seems like every time we go through this, I know I spend a lot of time trying to come up with my numbers, and then we have a short discussion and subjectively it gets lowered.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, the models have been off before, so, it's, a model has a lot of variables and it would be,
And therefore it should be lower.
well, no, it's just that it's not always that accurate. And so we do make subjective changes to it, so.
I understand.
Yeah, but history shows we still are under. I'm just trying to reconcile that in my head. And I'm not against being conservative. It's just.
I think it's better to be conservative than to be the opposite way, because
I'm
people,
not saying go really high. It's just how can we get to be closer?
How do we
Can
get to
I-
be accurate?
Yeah, can I just remind you
We're not
guys?
never going to be accurate, but maybe closer.
I mean, it's not really the council's job. Like, you guys aren't running a business where you need to like conserve about your own revenues, right? Like, you guys are a bunch of experts in your field who have been brought together to make the most accurate forecast. It is up to BNF and the members at other people who run the state budget to decide how they want to deal with that. But I would really encourage you guys that your mandate is to be as accurate as possible and not to be safe. Better be the safe and sorry. And so really you should
And-
be go wrong in both directions, equal amounts.
And the ledge, I mean, the money committees over time have learned to take what we say with a handful of Hawaiian salt. And at least some of the money committees, one of them, sometimes both of them, they don't try to spend every penny that we say is going to be in the, that we're forecasting. That doesn't happen anymore. If you go back far enough, it did, I think, but
It did, yeah.
it certainly doesn't happen anymore. So to follow Jack, I'm member 2. And the only thing that I can explain that 14% revenue forecast for fiscal 23 out of model 1, it's got to be the construction stuff, because most of my other inputs are not that dissimilar. I have a 1% higher inflation forecast and a 1% higher visitor arrivals forecast. So maybe, I'm sure that contributes, but if the construction sector is as strong as the permit numbers suggest, we may very well be coming in too low again.
well, what I hear, because I had wanted to do some renovations and everything, and from the architects, what they're saying is there's a big delay to getting anything approved through the county, for example, like maybe,
So, I'm talking about government contracts. I'm not talking about private
yes, I understand even the
residential
government
building.
projects, but people would actually have to worry about getting approvals for everything. There's a lot of
You don't
regulation.
get approval to pave a road. They don't go to Department of Planning and Permitting to put asphalt down. I don't think.
Well, I don't
Just
know.
the road's owned by the state, so
Yeah.
anyway.
Right now, you do have to go through a lot of hurdles to get anything done, even with, I would think, roads.
Yeah, so a bunch of this is also on military property, right? There was an $8 billion contract let by the Navy for a variety of improvements. And I guarantee you the Navy's not calling DPP and asking for a permit to,
And
to put up barracks or to work at Pearl Harbor.
Clean up Red Hill.
Well, they're not asking for that at all.
Yeah, and I can comment on what Carl's saying. I mean, the open ends that have been coming out from the Department of Defense have been huge. We're participating in some of them, and they are massive. And there's the A&E firms across the state are benefiting from it. There's a lot of construction that's going to be going on base, as well as with regard to some of the other state and city agencies. So construction is, from that perspective, going to be pretty large in the next 3 years, would be my guess.
3 years.
At least.
Yeah, but it starts now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, whether, how much it gets ramped up before the end of the fiscal year, some of it will be getting ramped up. And so the growth rate effects are going to happen late this fiscal year and next fiscal year, I think. Right.
Yes,
and
and
then,
Merlin, from a construction perspective, it's what you see most of the time is the cranes in the air, and that's the end result of it.
right.
The design and planning all goes on way in advance, and that's what's happening now. That's what's kicking off now, and that's what there's a large spend that's going on with regard to the architects, engineers, and designers they're going through that process. So those contracts are being firmed up and released now. So that work is starting. And so you're going to see more and more of that. And then once again, then the cranes and the construction is going to start happening, a few years from now, as more of these projects get underway.
So am I hearing that people would like to see something above 6% for fiscal 23?
We had
We came in at 7.5 because that's the first time mine came up exactly to that.
We could average Jack and Carl 6 and 7 and get 6.5. Still pretty close, Wendell.
Oh, Carl said 8 originally.
No, his model is saying 7, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm comfortable with 6 or 6.5. I think, look, as I said earlier, I think the risk is to the downside. The construction and the return of international visitors, which is happening, even with the yen at 140. The yen's at 140, and we've seen a doubling in Japanese passenger counts in the last 2 months. Maybe we don't get the tripling and quadrupling that we'd like to see, but we're still in recovery mode, right? We haven't fully recovered in the sense we've gotten everybody back to work, and visitor spending is back at the level it was before. And so there's still room for continued growth. So here I am arguing for higher numbers again. Sorry.
Well, should we say 6.5? Is that something that we can all agree on?
I can.
I'll make that
Second.
motion then.
what?
Second.
So there's a vote at 6.5. There's a motion and second for vote at 6.5 for the current year growth rate. Any further discussion? Marilyn, do you have anything?
No, it's about close to what I had. So I'm comfortable with 6.5.
I think everyone had that. If Jack was the 6, everyone had above 6.5, right?
Well, no, I'm happy with 6 too,
Okay.
because I think that there were some concerns to the downside.
Any other discussions? Okay, take a vote at 6.5 for fiscal year 2023. Vice Chair Newell,
Aye.
Dr. Saida,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham.
Aye.
Councilmember Maynard,
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Okay, the vote carries at 6.5 for fiscal year 2023 unanimously. Okay, next item on the agenda is the next fiscal year 2024.
Our model 1 is saying that our mean forecast is 6.2. We're on record for, what was it, 3 point something?
I guess the concern,
3.5.
3.5, right? 3.5 for.
yeah, concern is recession, possibility of recession.
That's why we're down. That's why we're down from 6.5 to 6.2. Just kidding. Ooh.
Yeah, 6.2 is too high. In my assessment. That's the model. And
you came
we
in at
just-
5.9.
well, I can't explain. Okay, well, I moved 5.9. No, I'm kidding. The mean forecast from Model 1 for fiscal 23 was 8.4, and we adopted 6.5. If we took the mean forecast and pulled it down by almost 200 basis points, it would be at 4 or 4.5. And frankly, I would be more comfortable with a number that in that range.
Okay, for the sake of discussion, I'll move 4.5. Well, that didn't get very far.
I don't think there's, I understand concerns about a recession. And I'm already on the record of saying I think the risks are to the downside. But one of the things you have to keep in mind is that one, every recession is different, and there's no particular reason that I'm aware of to think that if the U.S. economy goes into recession, it will be a particularly long or sharp one. There's so many features of the U.S. economy that are actually quite strong and continuing quite strong. We just got the ISM services index today, and it shows continued expansion. The labor market is continuing to add jobs. So if you look at the balances that people are holding in their checking accounts from first quarter this year, I don't have second quarter data yet. Even in real dollars, those numbers are still extremely elevated. They represent 6 or 7 months of consumer spending. So household balance sheets are in good shape. Business balance sheets are largely in good shape. So I really don't think there's a strong argument to be made for a weaker forecast. And even when the U.S. economy goes into recession, Hawaii doesn't necessarily always follow, right? There was always this myth that either 6 months after the California economy turned, Hawaii's would turn, or a year after the U.S. recession happened, Hawaii would have a recession. It just doesn't work that way. In fact, if some of the recessions, I went back and looked at each of the U.S. recessions going back to 1980, and in some of them, Hawaii's economy grew gangbusters while the U.S. was going into recession. Just kind of depend. And so because as I said before, we're still in recovery, there's a reasonable chance that we will continue to grow even if the U.S. economy slows fairly markedly.
Well,
of course, it will rely on Asian visitor spending to non-U.S. visitors to make that happen. It would take Australians and New Zealanders and South Korean and Japanese.
Right, at 4.5%, then keep in mind that inflation is probably going to be by that time, probably, if we're lucky, in the 4% range or so. So that's only 0.5% real growth in terms of revenues.
My forecast for CPI for fiscal 24 is 2.5%. The council's is 3.25%.
So we're talking
remember, that
about
gets you all the way out to
small.
summer of 2024.
Right. You expect inflation to be.
So our forecast is 2.5. The council's is 3.25. So at 4.5, you're still talking about 1.25% real
growth,
which is not that much slower than real GDP growth in an average year.
So should I keep my motion of 4.5?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion of fiscal 2024 at 4.5%?
So what you're saying is most of it is going to be inflation as far as the growth from the.
Well,
At least half.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
A little over half.
so the council's forecast for real GDP growth in fiscal 24 is 1.7. And yeah, so the numbers are close to consistent.
What's our
1.6% for real income.
Real personal income?
1.6 is the council's forecast. Oh, that's the same as mine.
Well, we're
Well, my
obviously brilliant.
GDP forecast is actually it's about the same, 1.8 versus 1.7 for the council.
How is it?
Does that mean great minds think alike?
Just lucky. I mean, the numbers are somewhat internally consistent. To have inflation come down that way, to have real growth at say 1.5% or so, and to come up with a 4.5% general fund number.
So these contracts that people have signed for employees, and right now they're I guess the raises are higher than 2.5, I would think, right?
Not a whole lot higher, but they are higher.
But there's probably going to be some people laid off. There's a recession.
You know, it depends on a lot of things. There's been some talk about labor hoarding, which, you know, if everybody's been really worried about being able to find people to work for them, then they may try to hold on to workers and not let them go. And that's a fine plan until your revenues plummet. So it really just kind of depends on whether we're talking about it just sort of a pause in growth. You know, how bad of a slowdown are we talking about? And in our thinking, we're not talking about anything like a deep recession. We're still talking about growth for the whole year nationally.
Well, it seems to me the kinds of tourists that are coming to Hawaii now, especially for Maui, are people who are higher income tourists. I mean, they're not the regular tourists who have to pay higher gas prices, which is kind of crazy. And so that's what I see on Maui. You know, you look at the hotels, the rates of hotel room rates and everything, and I look at what they're paying for everything. And I think that the kind of tourists we're attracting in Maui is the high-end tourists. But if you're trying to get, you know, it's going to be hard to attract tourists who are less wealthy, I think. And so I think there's where the problem is. And we have other tourism markets that have opened up, Europe. And so people might start looking at going elsewhere besides Hawaii. That's what I'm thinking, that, you know, we depend so much on tourism here that, and I guess if you keep thinking about the tourists will keep coming every year, and we have this luxury, I think that may come to an end just because we have other markets that are opening. So anyway, that is just something that we have to look at down the road. I think that to assume that we're going to have the same type, you know, the type of tourists and the amount of tourists might be not the best assumption to make.
So that's if you look at the council's mean forecast for visitor arrivals, I mean, I think Maryland's right about this. Not so much because, you know, suddenly all the people from California are going to decide they're going to go to Mexico or they're going to go to Bali or Europe instead of Hawaii, but more because of the constraints on lodging. But the council's mean forecast from 2025 to 2029 is 2% or higher every year. And that puts us at 10.9 million visitors by 2029. And our forecast is not even half that over that same time period.
Half that growth.
Yeah.
So what is yours peaking out at
Oh, good
in
question.
2029 or so?
Let's see.
10.1 or so?
Give me 1 second here.
What did we have in 19? Weren't we over 10 in 2019?
So
Were we like
we're
10,
we're
Yeah,
talking
slightly.
fiscal year here.
Yeah.
10.1 in the 18-19 fiscal year.
So 2029, what the heck? Oh, it's averaging. Let me go to the other table. I was trying to do the calculation on the fly. That's never a good idea. Here we go. Fiscal year numbers 2029. I think we have under 10 million.
Under 10. It's surprising.
Oh,
Is that possible? I don't know. I shouldn't try and do these calculations on the fly.
Well, it's certainly possible given community pushback on tourism growth.
Yeah, I mean, you can have more visitors if they stay a shorter period of time. Yeah, I think it's under 10 million, but just barely. The peak on a calendar year basis in 2019 was roughly 10.4 million.
Interesting.
And yeah, I mean, the number of, it hasn't fully materialized, but the number of short-term vacation rentals that were on Oahu that are not legal, and if enforcement happens and is fully effective, that's really enough to keep you from reaching that peak anytime soon until if there is more resort space added.
One of the really interesting developments of the last 2 years is Maui's TAT revenues are actually higher than Oahu's TAT revenues. And that's the first time that's ever happened. And it's a significant shift. We've been looking at it. We do think it's due, one, mainly, we're expecting it to get closer because of because of East Asian visitors like coming mainly, they prefer Honolulu for the shopping. But more than that, we do think that there's cause due to the ban on Airbnbs and transient vacation rentals in Oahu, having those stronger laws than the neighbor islands.
Yeah, so talking about Oahu and its visitor recovery, the numbers for August look like we're probably looking at 80+% occupancy on Oahu. And, a lot of that is return of some of the Asian visitors, but also Canadians, and that's primarily a hotel number. So there's fewer places for these visitors to stay. But we have a motion on the table. Don't we have a motion for the fiscal 24?
I was just holding it up for any further discussion. Any other discussion or comments? So there's a vote on the table for fiscal 2024 for 4.5%.
Okay, so this is on top of increasing our other, right?
Yes, from 5 to 6.5%. So we're increasing the base by 1.5, and then the base being fiscal 2023, and we're now increasing the second year by another point. So over 2.5%. Okay. Uh, Christy, did you have any further comments or?
Well, you know, I am concerned about, I don't know who can afford, obviously somebody can afford these hotel prices. It's just amazing to me that we are able to capture the spend that we have with the price, without pricing most people out of the market. I'm just amazed.
I think personally, I think we're going to feel it down the road because once the rest of the world opens up and there's a lot more competition and the dollar is not so strong, I don't think we'll enjoy such high pricing. I don't think we'll be able to keep the high pricing like we've been during this period post pandemic.
The consumers very liquid, as Carl mentioned earlier.
Yeah. But they'll just have more options, you know, once the rest of the world opens
But
up.
in terms of our competitive markets, where can a tourist not go? I mean, I can understand them maybe not wanting to go because of not wanting to have to deal with COVID in a specific location, and yet it's not really clear to me that COVID is really playing much of a role at all in travel at this point.
I mean, you can't go to Japan easily. I mean, you can.
Well, right, but I'm talking
hassle.
about our
You
market, Kurt.
Huh?
How many of the visitors from California and from the West Coast, west of the Rockies, that frequent Hawaii? How much is?
Or they can go to Europe, you know.
They can go to Europe.
Yeah, but
And
it's
they have
not.
been.
Yeah, but it's not like it was. It's not like freely open like it was before. And the prices are really high. You know, the airfare prices are really high. Right?
And you know what?
Yeah, a
What
lot of people.
concerns me is that,
Yeah.
you know, when you look at the hotel occupancy rates, it's been falling on Maui. Okay, we haven't been able to have as much. So we have high hotel room rates and low occupancy. And I think that has to do with supply and demand. And plus, tourists are getting surprised because they have additional taxes of the additional 3% from the counties that they have to deal with. So, you know, when I went traveling end of June, I just looked at the hotel bill and everything was taxes. And then it'll be a sticker shock. And then other people are probably seeing the same thing and they'll say, hey, Hawaii is just too expensive. And that's what I'm afraid of, is that we have been pricing ourselves out of the market because of the taxes that have been, you know, added on. I mean, I think the counties are probably doing a lot better, but there's a point when you are just too expensive and word gets around, you know, Hawaii's too expensive, Maui's too expensive. That's what I hear. And so that's my concern, that reputation of having high prices is going to be passed around and people will look for alternative vacation destinations.
So just a quick comment about that. Next time we do a forecast, have that reflected in your visitor arrivals numbers, right? Because the council's forecast for visitor arrivals averages about 2% a year from 2025 on.
Yeah, but I mean, even Carl, your numbers on visitor arrivals, I was kind of surprised. You were projecting it not to grow as much as I would have expected it to grow.
That there's a number of factors there. One of them is capacity. We think that's going to continue to be constrained, and the other one is that historically, when Japanese visitors stop coming, it takes them a very long time to get back to previous levels. So if you look at 90, you look at the SARS, you look at a variety of different crises, whether it was 9/11 or the first Gulf War, and it can take 5 or 10 years for Japanese arrivals to get back to their previous peak levels.
Yeah.
And that's not a very scientific basis for forecasting, but the models know this, right? It's built into the models, and so we have a slow recovery for Japanese visitors.
Yeah, I also think there was a lot of pent up demand, you know, during the COVID, all the lockdown stuff, and we're a beneficiary of.
Well, we were counting on that for Japan to happen just like it did for the U.S. And right now we're not there yet, right? We haven't seen that pent up demand unleashed yet because of all the reasons we've been discussing.
Yeah, but I mean, from the US, we were a beneficiary of all that
Yes.
pent-up demand.
So, Marilyn, I was just going to make one comment too. So, I would agree with you. Taxes are a big thing, and you look at your bill. But I don't think it's any different than going anyplace else. When I was in New York, when I was, California, I mean, there's a big tax bill, for visitors in a lot of other states that I've been noticing. So it's, I think you get kind of used to seeing a big tax number on your bill at the end of the day. Not saying that it's right, but I mean, yeah, it's as far as in comparison to others. I mean, I think we're probably might be a little bit higher, but I think people are used to seeing a large tax and resort fees and other types of stuff that's all being tacked onto their bills at the end of the day.
Well, when
The rates are so high, though, Maui. The rates
yeah,
are so
it's
high,
over
right?
Well, that's true.
$1,000.
Yeah,
It's a pretty big number when you add in the tax, right? It's not like you're paying over $1,000 for a
Oh, wow.
hotel.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
I didn't realize the rates were that high over there. Wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Is this going to change your
Hotel
forecast
rooms,
for fiscal
1,200,
2020?
1,000. That's what I'm talking about. It's impossible to, because I've been following the hotel room rates, wanted to have a convention here, but the rates are so high that the lowest I could get was 500 a night for a convention rate. And then if you look at the fact that when we're competing against Europe, for example, that opened up, the euro, the currency rate, you compare that to what the US dollar is in the euro, and you'll find that people are going to say, well, I'll go to Europe now because the exchange rate is so good in Europe, and I'll buy things in Europe. And if it's so high here, we have to look at competition. They'll say, well, too high here. And then we could have priced ourselves out of the market.
So I wonder if we can vote on fiscal year 24. I mean, the discussion we're having, I think, is more about the out years. I don't know if we're talking about fiscal 24.
I think Councilmember Maynard was talking about 24.
If we 4.5 is a little high for me, especially since it's coming off of a higher base. But perhaps we can agree to 4.5 and then going down to 3.5 where we are for the rest of for the out years. I know this is not the motion that you made, Jack, but
My motion's only for 24, but I agree with you about the out years.
okay.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why we would change the out years myself. And I'm not wed to 4.5. Jack threw that out to get the discussion started. And I mean, I'm sympathetic with the notion that we're talking about an increase in the forecast on top of an increase.
Top of a 29% growth year last year.
So should we maybe?
What do you want to go back to 23 then?
You want to do?
No.
Would you feel more comfortable at 4 instead of 4.5?
You're asking me?
I'm asking Carl.
I think it would be. I think 4 would be fine. As I think there's a risk, given our history of under forecasting, mostly during expansions, that we're going to under forecast again, particularly given the construction picture. But I mean, really, 4.5. There's no difference.
I think I would.
I can live with 4.
Okay.
So
So someone needs to make that motion.
I'll make that motion.
Well, I
think-
already made a motion. There was a
4.5.
second
And there was a second
already.
at 4.5. So
So,
will you revise your motion or withdraw and submit a new motion?
well, I will revise my motion to 4%. If the second will accept it.
Second, we'll accept.
Any more discussion?
can we
at
vote
4
now?
for any more discussion for 4% growth rate for fiscal 2024? Okay, Vice Chair Newell,
Aye.
Dr. Siderhoff,
Yeah, I
Dr. Bonham.
Aye.
Councilmember Maynard,
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Okay, the vote for growth rate of 4% for fiscal year 2024 carries unanimously. Any discussion about the next 4 years or next 3 years or 4 years, fiscal 2025 to 2028?
My inclination is to leave them as they were for our May forecast.
That's
Any-
my inclination too.
Any second on that? Or is that a motion, Dr. Saida?
Well, no, not yet.
So let me just toss out some, the council's mean forecast for the CPI it's 2.8% in 2025, and it goes down to 2% by 2029. So just to keep that in perspective, we're talking about 1 to 1 1/4 or 3/4 to 1 1/4 real.
That sounds reasonable.
Sounds good.
Now I'm worried.
Come on, Jack.
Let's see, what are we on record for? 3 point,
3.5 for all of the years, the 4 years.
yeah. I'm okay with 3.5.
Me too.
Any motion at 3.5?
I'll
I'll
make the
move it.
motion.
No, you go ahead. Make the motion.
Okay, I'll make the motion.
And I second.
And that's for 3.5 for the last 4 years,
rest-
from fiscal 2025 to fiscal 2028. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to take a vote if there's no discussion. Vice Chair Newell,
Aye.
Dr. Saida,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham,
Aye.
Councilmember
Sounds like a
Hayashi,
reluctant.
I
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Okay, the vote for a growth rate of 3.5% for fiscal 2025 to fiscal year 2028 carries unanimously at 3.5% growth rate. The next item, is it BNF we have next?
Yes.
Mr. Chun?
Good afternoon, Chair and council members. My name is Donovan Chun, and I'm with the Department of Budget and Finance. We have provided you with a report of revised projections of general fund non-tax revenues, non-general fund tax, and non-tax revenues that since the May 23rd meeting. The revenue estimates were prepared by departments in July and were based on point-in-time assumptions made by the program and the department staff. Our report does include a summary of significant changes.
Do you want to share it or you want me to share it? Mr. Chun?
Well,
Or-
you can. I mean, I just was going to reference
Okay,
like two things. One is
okay.
on page 2A. Under this is general fund non-tax revenues. Charges
So this is
for
table 2A, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Under charges for current services, there's a net decrease in fiscal year 22 through 29. This reflects a reduction of reimbursements of health fund premiums from non-general fund programs. Currently that and reimbursements for projected costs of other post-employment benefits. Currently that's been suspended. There will be a change. The suspension will be lifted, and then we will need a approval from the feds for the new rate for reimbursement from non-general fund programs. Yeah. And then the other comment I wanted to make was regarding federal fund revenues. In general, there was a huge influx of federal funds that came into the state system.
Mr. Chan, is this 2A as well?
No, this is just a general comment.
Okay.
we've seen an adjustment of the timing of those federal fund revenues to programs. A lot of money came in, and now they're readjusting the actual timing of when we will see those funds actually come into the state's programs. And that's due to just execution of the projects. There are issues sometimes with the timing of when the projects get started and such. So that was just a general comment. And that's the rest of our significant changes have been reported in that attachment to our report. And that's the only comments I had.
Any questions of Mr. Chun? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chun.
I move we accept the report.
Second.
Okay, vote. Any discussion before we vote? Okay, vote to accept Mr. Chun and BNF's report. Vice Chair Niwao,
Aye.
Dr. Siderhouse,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham,
Aye.
Councilmember Maynard,
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Okay, so the vote to approve the BNF report is approved unanimously. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chun again. Okay, final item on the agenda is the next TPI, personal taxpayer personal income meeting. And Dr. Kobe, when is the report date?
November 5th.
November 5th. So I'm going to be out that week of the first week in November.
November 5th is a Saturday, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right. The 4th is a Friday.
I'm out that week also. And the week before, and half the week before that.
Okay.
Yeah. Where are you going?
Europe.
Oh, Marilyn's right. Everyone's going to Europe.
Well, Maui was too expensive. So the average room rate on Maui is over $600.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
that's
then-
why I say we have a lot of very high-end tourists.
Yeah.
But people are gonna be balking at the taxes on top of the high room rates.
No, they're not.
Yeah, they are.
No, they're not.
So, Dr. Sada, then you're basically saying you can't make it from.
Well, I could, we're Zooming, right? So, I mean, I can Zoom from anywhere.
Okay. How many? What's
Maybe
the time?
2
Just a
o'clock in the
TPI
morning.
meeting, Jack.
Yeah, I
12
know.
hours.
Oh, geez.
Different.
Maybe I'll be more awake for that.
afternoon.
This is interfering with my afternoon nap.
Well, maybe you can take an afternoon nap and get up late at night for the meeting.
There we go. Well, you guys pick a date and we'll see.
Any suggested date and time? How is everyone on the, what's that, the 28? Oh, no, 27, 2 p.m.
That works for me.
That's going to be 2 a.m. for you though, Jack.
Are you, wait, you're talking the 20, did you say the 27th?
Yes.
Of October.
October
October,
27th.
Yeah.
That's a Thursday, October 27th at 2 p.m.
Yeah, that works.
Marilyn, Christy, Scott, Wendell, is that work for you guys?
Good
That
for
works for
me.
me.
Okay.
We'll see how good Vikings Wi-Fi is.
Okay. Where are you going to be in Europe?
Stranded on the sandbar on the Danube.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you better get
Sounds like
there
fun.
before they run out of water.
Yeah. You're telling me.
So the next meeting will be Thursday, October the 27th at 2 p.m. Hawaii time.
Got it.
Okay. Any other items? Okay, thank you, everyone. We're adjourned. And Dr. Kobe, thank you to you and your staff. And I forgot I can't pronounce his last name. But
Bybars.
Bybars.
Bybars
Karkov. Yeah, thank Bybars again.
Carl Cavalli.
Yeah, for
something
the
Of-
Something like
excellent
that, right?
That's right.
presentation.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Jack's
Yeah.
got it.
Thank you.
Okay, Okay,
we'll
thank you,
see-
everyone.
Economic
Thank you.
Association Conference on Friday.
Okay,
Be there or be square.
okay,
Okay, bye.
okay, bye, everyone.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Thank you.